The silence following the applause was deafening, more so than any ovation. On that stage, bathed in golden spotlights, Clara Mendez had just done something no one thought possible. She'd transformed an auditorium full of skeptical executives into a sea of tears and genuine smiles, using only her voice. But to understand how a 42-year-old woman laid off 3 times in the past year and deemed unsuitable for the current market got there, we need to go back 6 months to a humiliation that nearly broke her. It was a rainy Monday in March when Clara pushed through the revolving doors of the mirrored building housing Zenith Consulting, carrying a cardboard box containing her few personal belongings. Her fingers trembled, not from the cold, but from the shame burning on her cheeks like hot coals. Inside the box, besides a mug with a picture of her daughter Sophia and a small cactus that had bravely withstood the company's merciless air conditioning, was a letter of termination she hadn't even been able to fully read. The words "profile unsuitable for new productivity standards" echoed in her mind like a death sentence. In the polished marble lobby, Clara almost slipped when her flat shoes, the only ones she could still afford after months of tightening her budget, lost their grip on the wet floor. The box tilted dangerously, and she clutched it to her chest as if it were the last shred of her dignity. A group of young executives, uniformed in their impeccable suits and artificial smiles, passed her without a glance. To them, Clara was invisible, just another discarded cog in the relentless corporate machine. Outside, the rain fell in thick sheets, blurring the city into a gray wash. Clara stood under the awning, watching people hurry past, each enveloped in their own bubble of urgency and purpose. She was in no hurry to go anywhere. She had no purpose. At 42, after 2 decades dedicated to the corporate world, she felt like a ghost, present, but lacking the substance to be noticed. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. A text from Sophia, her 17-year-old daughter. "Mom, did you get the promotion? I'm rooting for you." Clara's heart constricted. How could she tell her daughter that instead of a promotion she'd received another layoff? How could she explain that the woman once considered promising in human resources was now seen as obsolete, too slow to keep up with the frenetic pace of a world that seemed to have left people like her behind? That night, sitting in the small kitchen of her 2-bedroom apartment, a space that once felt cozy but now felt claustrophobic, Clara did the calculations for the 10th time. Her severance pay would last maybe 2 months if they were extremely careful with their spending. Sophia was in her senior year of high school, dreaming of medical school, and Clara felt the crushing weight of not being able to support her daughter's dreams. That's when the memories started to whisper. As she idly stirred her now cold coffee, Clara found herself transported to the dusty stage of a small neighborhood theater. She was 19, her hair flowing freely, her voice echoing through the empty rows of faded red chairs. Back then, she wasn't Clara, the disposable employee. She was Clara, the young woman who silenced crowds with the first note of a song. "You have a gift," whispered the voice of Maestro Antonio, her former vocal coach, like a distant echo. "Your voice doesn't just make sounds, Clara, it touches souls." But life had other plans. A hasty marriage at 22, an unexpected pregnancy, a bitter divorce 3 years later. Music became a luxury she could no longer afford. The voices that once filled theaters were silenced by spreadsheets, reports, and endless meetings. For 20 years, Clara buried her voice under layers of responsibility and fear until she completely forgot it existed. Now, sitting in that silent kitchen, with bills scattered across the table and the bitter taste of rejection still in her mouth, Clara wondered if any part of that young dreamer was still alive inside her. Sophia entered the kitchen, already in her pajamas, and immediately noticed the somber expression on her mother's face. "Mom, what happened?" she asked, her voice carrying a maturity that broke Clara's heart. "I got laid off again, honey." The words came out as a defeated sigh. Sophia sat beside her mother, placing her hand on her. "These companies don't know what they're missing. You were always the best employee, the most dedicated. Dedication isn't enough anymore," Clara murmured, avoiding her daughter's hopeful gaze. "They want young, agile people who accept lower salaries and work late without complaining. Then maybe it's time to stop trying to fit into what they want," Sophia said, surprising Clara with the firmness in her voice. "Remember those old cassette tapes you kept in the attic? I used to listen to them secretly when I was little. Your voice was magical, Mom. Clara felt her eyes fill with tears. That was a long time ago, Sophia. I'm not that person anymore. You never stopped being her. Sophia insisted. You just forgot for a while. That night, Clara went up to the attic for the first time in years. Among dusty boxes and furniture covered in sheets, she found a small trunk holding the remnants of her former life. Her hands trembled as she opened the lid, as if she were desecrating a sacred tomb. There they were, the demo CDs that were never released, yellowed sheet music, photographs of her on various stages, and a cassette tape labeled Clara, Melody Records Audition, 1999. With trembling fingers, Clara placed the tape into an old but still functioning radio. Her own voice echoed through the dusty attic, singing a ballad she had composed about hope and rebirth. The melody enveloped her like a warm embrace, and Clara wept, not from sadness, but from recognition. There was the person she had buried under years of conformity and fear. Over the following weeks, while sending resumes to companies that would likely reject her, Clara secretly began to exercise her voice. She started with basic breathing exercises in the solitude of her room, then progressed to simple scales. At first her voice was hoarse and out of tune, like an abandoned instrument needing to be tuned. But gradually, the power and sweetness returned. It was Sophia who suggested she apply to the Forgotten Talents program, a segment on a local television show that gave opportunities to people over 40 to showcase skills they had put aside. Clara initially resisted. The idea of exposing herself publicly after so many rejections terrified her. Mom, Sophia said one night, finding Clara humming softly while washing dishes, you can't keep this gift only for the walls of this house. There are people out there who need to hear your voice. What if I fail? Clara asked, her insecurities surfacing like open wounds. What if you fly? Sophia countered, with a smile that lit up her entire face. The application was almost an act of desperation. Clara filled out the online form during a sleepless night, when the loneliness weighed so heavily that any possibility of connection seemed valid. She chose to sing John Lennon's Imagine, not because it was an easy song, but because the words had always deeply touched her, speaking of a world where people could simply be human, without judgment or barriers. 2 weeks later, she received a phone call. They had selected her application for an in-person audition. Clara's heart pounded, a mixture of terror and euphoria she hadn't felt in decades. On the morning of the audition, Clara woke up before her alarm. Her nerves were so frayed that she could barely eat breakfast. She dressed in a simple navy blue dress, the same one she wore for job interviews, and looked in the mirror. The woman staring back seemed fragile, with wrinkles around her eyes that told stories of sleepless nights and constant worries. But there was something different in that gaze, a spark of determination she hadn't seen in years. The television studio was smaller than Clara had imagined, but the atmosphere was intense. There were about 20 candidates, most visibly nervous. Clara sat in a plastic chair, next to a 50-year-old man, nervously tapping his fingers on an old guitar, and a woman practicing dance steps with almost imperceptible movements. Clara Mendez, a young producer with a headset and a clipboard, called her. The stage, under the intense lights, seemed immense. 3 judges sat behind a table: Ricardo Alvarez, a renowned music producer known for discovering new talents; Marina Santos, a famous singer from the 90s; and Carlos Medina, the show's host with his professional smile and analytical gaze. So Clara, Carlos said, consulting his notes, you worked in human resources for 20 years and are now unemployed. What made you think you could have a musical career at 42? The question was casually phrased, but Clara felt the subtle venom behind it. She took a deep breath, remembering Sophia's words. Because maybe it's exactly at 42 that a person finally understands what she truly has to say, Clara replied, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Marina leaned forward, interested. And what do you have to say? Clara closed her eyes for a moment, connecting with that 19-year-old who once dreamed of touching souls. That it's never too late to remember who we really are. The music started, a soft instrumental version of Imagine. Clara took a deep breath and began to sing. The first notes were shaky, but as the song progressed, something extraordinary happened. Clara's voice didn't just improve, it transformed. Each word carried the weight of 2 decades of experience. Each note was tinged with the vulnerability of someone who had known both hope and despair. She wasn't just singing about imagining a better world, she was sharing her own journey of rediscovery. During the chorus, Clara opened her eyes and saw something that shocked her, tears in Marina's eyes. Ricardo had stopped writing and was watching her with an intensity that made Clara feel seen, really seen, for the first time in years. Even Carlos, known for his cool professional demeanor, seemed moved. When the music ended, silence stretched for long seconds. Clara remained motionless, not knowing if she had been brilliant or disastrous. Ricardo was the first to speak, his voice slightly hoarse with emotion. Clara, in 30 years in the music industry, I've rarely heard anyone sing with so much truth. You weren't performing, you were telling us your story. Marina nodded, still wiping her eyes discreetly. Your voice has something that can't be taught, a lived soul. It's powerful because it's real. Carlos, normally the most critical, leaned forward. Clara, you reminded us why music exists, not to impress, but to connect. When Clara left the studio that afternoon, her legs trembled so much that she had to lean against the hallway wall. They had said they would call her in a week with the results, but she already felt victorious. For the first time in months, she felt alive. The call came 3 days later. Not only had they selected Clara to participate in the program, but they wanted her to perform in the year-end special, which would be recorded live in front of 500 people and broadcast nationwide. The news left Clara in a state of shock. Sophia screamed with joy and hugged her so tightly they almost tumbled to the kitchen floor. But along with the euphoria came terror. 500 people. National broadcast. What if she failed? What if her voice cracked at the crucial moment? Mom, Sophia said, holding Clara's face in her hands, do you know the difference between you and all those companies that rejected you? Clara shook her head, lost in the intensity of her daughter's gaze. They're afraid of real feelings. You embrace them. That's what makes your voice so special. In the weeks leading up to the performance, Clara dedicated herself to rehearsals with a passion she hadn't felt in decades. She woke before sunrise and practiced until her voice was hoarse. Sophia helped her, timing her breathing exercises and giving honest feedback on each performance. One afternoon, while Clara was singing in her small backyard, the neighbors had grown accustomed to the rehearsals. She noticed a small crowd had gathered on the other side of the fence. Mrs. Margot, the retired neighbor, had tears in her eyes. Young John, who lived in the apartment above, had stopped skateboarding to listen. Even the stray cat that usually ran from everyone had approached and sat calmly near the fence. Your voice, Mrs. Margot said, her voice choked with emotion, reminds me of when I was young and believed anything was possible. That's when Clara understood something fundamental. Her voice wasn't just hers. It was a vehicle for the memories, dreams, and hopes of everyone who heard it. Each person seemingly touched by her music was recognizing something of themselves in the vulnerability and authenticity Clara offered. And that's exactly why I'm sharing this story with you today, because I deeply believe we all have a voice, whether literal or metaphorical, that has been silenced by fear, circumstances, or the belief that it's too late to start over. If Clara's journey is touching you the same way it touched me when I met her, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. It's not just to support me, it's so we can continue sharing stories like this, stories that remind us that our authenticity is our greatest power. Because when we find our true voice, we don't just transform ourselves, we transform everyone around us. The night of the performance arrived like an inevitable storm. Clara was backstage, wearing a simple black dress that Sophia had insisted on buying. Mom, You're going to shine, so you need something that won't distract from your inner light. Her hands were sweating, and she felt as if thousands of butterflies were struggling to escape her stomach. Through the curtains, she could see the audience settling in, 500 people, each with their own stories, expectations, and judgments. In the corner of the front row, Clara spotted Sophia, who had made a small sign with the words, "Fly, Mom," written in colorful letters. "Clara," a familiar voice called. It was Ricardo, who had approached backstage. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," Clara admitted, without trying to hide it. Ricardo smiled. "Perfect. Terror is the emotion closest to transcendence. It means you're about to do something that matters." He paused, studying Clara's tense face. "Can I tell you a secret? At your audition, when you finished singing, Marina turned to me and said, 'This woman isn't trying to be a star, she's trying to be human.' And that's infinitely rarer." Before Clara could respond, the host was announcing, "And now, a woman who reminds us that it's never too late to rediscover our gifts, Clara Mendes." Clara walked onto the stage in steps that seemed to happen in slow motion. The lights were brighter than she remembered, creating a circle of clarity that separated her from the rest of the world. In the center of the stage was a simple microphone and a stool. Nothing else. She positioned herself in front of the microphone and looked out at the audience. 500 faces stared back at her, some expectant, others skeptical, many simply curious. Clara took a deep breath and thought of all the times she had been rejected, underestimated, discarded. She thought of all the mornings she had woken up feeling invisible, all the nights she had cried in frustration, and then she thought of Sophia, of Mrs. Margot, of young John, of all the people who had seen something in her voice that she herself had forgotten she possessed. "Good evening," Clara said, her voice echoing clearly throughout the auditorium. "My name is Clara, and for 20 years I worked in offices where nobody knew I sang. In fact, until a few months ago, I didn't even know anymore." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the audience. "Tonight I want to sing a song I wrote many years ago, when I still believed it was possible to change the world with a song. I lost this song for 2 decades, just as I lost many other things. But I recently discovered that some things never really disappear. They just wait for us to be brave enough to find them again." Clara closed her eyes and began to sing a cappella, without instrumental accompaniment. The song was called Rebirth, and she had composed it at 21, after a particularly difficult night, when she almost gave up singing forever. Her voice began softly, almost a whisper, speaking of darkness and fear. But as the music progressed, it swelled with power and hope. Clara sang of phoenixes rising from the ashes, of seeds blossoming after long winters, of people finding their light in the darkest moments. As she sang, Clara opened her eyes and saw something magical happening. The audience wasn't just listening, they were experiencing. She saw tears in the eyes of a middle-aged executive in the third row, likely battling her own corporate struggles. An elderly man in the balcony closed his eyes and swayed gently, as if the music were taking him back to a cherished moment from his youth. Even more striking, Clara noticed the skeptical and judgmental expressions had vanished. In their place was a collective vulnerability, as if her music had created a safe space where everyone could remember their own forgotten dreams. At the song's climax, when Clara hit a particularly high and powerful note, singing about the courage to reinvent oneself, she saw that even the backstage crew had stopped working to listen. The nearest cameraman had teary eyes, and the show's director was making enthusiastic gestures to his team. When the music ended, the ensuing silence was unlike anything Clara had experienced at the audition. This wasn't a silence of judgment or hesitation, it was a silence of reverence, like the kind that follows a particularly moving prayer in a church. Then slowly, one person began to clap, then another. Within seconds, the entire audience was on its feet, not just applauding, but shouting and weeping. Sophia was jumping in her seat, tears streaming down her face. Marina, on the judging panel, made no effort to hide her sobs, but it was Carlos's reaction that surprised Clara the most. The host, known for his professional composure, stood, applauding with an intensity that made his arms tremble. When the applause finally subsided enough for him to speak, his voice was visibly choked with emotion. "Clara," he said, struggling to control his own voice, "in 15 years of hosting this show, I've never seen an audience respond like this. You didn't just sing, you reminded us of who we are beneath all the layers of fear and conformity." Ricardo leaned into the microphone, still wiping his eyes. "Clara, when you sang that first note at the audition, I knew I was witnessing something special, but today you proved that true music doesn't come from technical perfection. It comes from the courage to be completely vulnerable." Marina, finally regaining her composure, added, "There are singers who impress, singers who entertain, and singers who transform. You, Clara, transform. You reminded us that we all have a song inside us that deserves to be heard." In the days following the performance, Clara's life changed in a surreal way. The video of her performance went viral on social media, shared millions of times with comments that left her speechless. People from all over the country sent messages telling how her music had inspired them to rediscover their own forgotten talents. A 60-year-old retired teacher wrote that she had returned to painting after 15 years. A 55-year-old engineer said her song encouraged him to finally open the small carpentry shop he'd always dreamed of. Hundreds of people shared their own stories of rebirth and rediscovery. But perhaps the most touching moment came 3 weeks later, when Clara received an unexpected call. It was from Zenith Consulting, the company that had fired her months before. "Clara," said the voice of Sandra, the HR manager, "I'd like to talk to you about an opportunity." Clara almost laughed. "Sandra, you fired me 4 months ago saying I had an unsuitable profile." "I know, and well, we made a mistake. We saw your performance on television, and we realized that what we interpreted as inadequacy was in fact authenticity. We'd like to offer you a position as a personal development manager, helping other employees find their hidden potential." Clara paused, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. "Sandra, I appreciate the offer, but I'm no longer looking to fit into molds made by other people. I'm creating my own." Indeed, Clara had received several offers in the following weeks: proposals to record an album, contracts for shows, invitations to motivational speaking engagements. But the opportunity that moved her most came from an unexpected source. A community center in a deprived neighborhood wanted her to create a music program for unemployed people over 40. "The idea," explained Carla, the center's coordinator, "is to use music as therapy and an empowerment tool. We want to show people who feel discarded by society that they still have a lot to offer." Clara accepted immediately. Twice a week, she met with a group of 15 people, former executives, prematurely retired factory workers, housewives returning to the workforce after decades. Together, they explored not only vocal techniques, but also the art of reconnecting with forgotten parts of themselves. It was during one of these sessions that Clara had her greatest epiphany. She was working with Miguel, a 50-year-old accountant who had lost his job and his self-confidence. He insisted he couldn't sing, that his voice was awful. "Miguel," Clara said softly, "you're trying to sing with the voice you think you should have. How about trying to sing with the voice you actually have?" When Miguel finally relaxed and stopped trying to impress, his voice revealed a warm and engaging quality that silenced the entire group in admiration. Tears ran down his face, not of shame, but of recognition. "I had forgotten," he whispered, "that there was still something beautiful inside me." It was at that moment that Clara fully understood her true mission.
Her voice wasn't important in and of itself, it was important as a mirror, helping others find their own voices. She wasn't a singing teacher, she was a guide helping people rediscover themselves. 6 months after her first performance, Clara was back on stage, but this time, she wasn't alone. Beside her were Michael, Mrs. Margot, John, and all the other members of her community group. They had organized a benefit concert called Rediscovered Voices, where each person would share a song representing their journey of rebirth. As Clara looked out at the audience, a mix of family, friends, and curious strangers, she saw Sophia in the front row, wearing a t-shirt that read, "My mom found her voice and taught me to find mine." "Good evening," Clara said into the microphone, her voice resonating with a confidence that now felt natural. "A year ago, I was a woman who had forgotten who she was. Today, not only have I remembered, I've discovered that my true voice was never about singing perfectly. It was about singing truthfully." She gestured to her fellow performers. "All of us here have been considered inadequate, outdated, disposable. But we've discovered something that no corporation can give or take away from us, the ability to reinvent ourselves, to find beauty in our imperfections, to transform our vulnerability into strength." The concert that followed was a celebration of imperfections, transformed into art. Michael sang a ballad he'd written about new beginnings. Mrs. Margot performed a song from her youth, with a fragility that was paradoxically powerful. John rapped about finding purpose beyond teenage rebellion, and Clara sang rebirth again, but this time, she wasn't alone. Her voice was joined by a chorus of people who had learned that their stories of failure were in fact stories of resilience and transformation. When the final note echoed through the auditorium and the applause erupted once more, Clara felt a deep peace settle into her heart. She had found something far more valuable than a job or recognition. She had found her purpose. Backstage, Sophia hugged her tightly. "Mom, you saved yourself and so many others." Clara smiled, stroking her daughter's hair. "Actually, sweetheart, I discovered that saving others is the best way to save ourselves." Months passed, and the Rediscovered Voices program expanded to other neighborhoods in the city. Clara received invitations to replicate the project in other cities, and even other countries expressed interest. But she kept her feet firmly planted in her community, working with real people facing real challenges. One afternoon, while organizing sheet music in her small music room, a space she'd converted with Sophia's enthusiastic help, Clara found that old cassette tape she'd rediscovered in the attic. She held it up to the light, noticing how the plastic had yellowed with age. On that tape was the voice of a young woman in her 20s, full of dreams and fear in equal measure. Clara smiled, realizing that that young woman and the woman she had become weren't different people. They were chapters of the same story, connected by an invisible thread of authenticity that had survived decades of silencing. She put the tape back in its case, but this time she didn't store it in the attic. She left it on the table, next to the new compositions she was writing, songs that spoke not only of rebirth, but of continuity, of how our true essence patiently waits for us to have the courage to honor it. That night, during dinner, Sophia shared that she'd been accepted into medical school with a full scholarship. "You know what I wrote in my application essay?" she asked, her eyes shining. "I wrote about how my mom taught me that healing people sometimes means helping them remember who they really are." Clara felt her eyes fill with tears, tears of gratitude, of pride, of a happiness so profound it seemed to come from some ancestral place in her soul. "Sophia, you're going to be an extraordinary doctor." "I learned from the best," Sophia replied, smiling. "You don't just heal with music, Mom. You heal with presence, with truth, with the courage to be vulnerable." Weeks later, Clara received a letter that left her speechless. It was from Richard, the music producer, who who had been a judge at her audition. He wrote about an ambitious project, creating a documentary about people who rediscovered their talents after 40, with Clara as the central figure. Your story, the letter read, represents something our society desperately needs to hear: that human value doesn't diminish with age, and that our experiences of failure and restarting are often our greatest treasures. She resumed playing, and this time Sophia began to sing an improvised melody about second chances and belated courage. Their voices blended, creating a harmony that seemed to symbolize not only their mother-daughter relationship, but the continuity between generations, the way our authenticity can inspire others to find their own. Outside, the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold. But inside the small room, two voices continued to intertwine, creating music that no one else would hear, but which was laden with all the joy and gratitude that come from knowing oneself completely and accepting oneself unconditionally. And so, on that golden afternoon, Clara Mendez, the woman once considered unsuitable for the job market, understood that she had found the most important work of her life: to be completely, courageously, undeniably herself, and in doing so, to give permission for the whole world to do the same. The music continued to echo through the house, carried on the evening breeze, touching hearts that didn't even know they needed to be touched, awakening voices that had long awaited the courage to sing.